Hello, welcome back. It's Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony. Welcome back to another video. Today, you can see up here, it is October 6th, Tuesday, October 6th. We are 4 weeks out from the US election, believe it or not. And we'll talk a little bit about the energy of that, of course, as well as the Mercury retrograde coming up and the eclipses immediately following the election, essentially during that whole Thanksgiving to Christmas time frame. Some important eclipses coming up. But I also wanted to recap where we've been. I've done several videos since the beginnings of this crazy 2020 lockdown energy starting in March. I think I did one in March, in May, I did one in August. I think I did one, yeah, one in June as well. So I think I've done four. So this would be number 5 since March, which is a little more often than I do these. I just think it's pretty important, though, to keep up with the pace of events and whatnot. And as you see in front of you, I've got the planetwatcher.com up again. I just feel like this is a much easier way and a better way for my voice to be heard instead of being drowned out by the wind and whatnot from doing those outdoor videos that I used to do. And I may do some more in the future, but for now, I like this format. And it's pretty hot outside where I am right now, so this is going to be more comfortable. I'm actually in Phoenix, Arizona right now for work. I'll be going to work here later in the week and then heading back to California after that. But I think it's pretty important to go over some things right now. I hope everybody is well, and do feel free to ask any questions in the YouTube, or if you want to contact me directly to Sovereign Harmony on Facebook, that is okay as well. And if you're interested in any kind of a personal reading, we can do that through Facebook, Sovereign Harmony on Facebook, or you can always alert me through YouTube as well. But in any case, so I'll start with this little cluster. This has been our troublemaker cluster since March. We've been talking about what was first the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January. That was followed by the Pluto-Jupiter conjunction that started around March, and it's been off and on since, and that's about to end here in the next couple of months. And so the 2020 theme of this cluster in Capricorn is on its way out. And notice that all three are now in black and not red. Red, again, denotes retrograde. We got Mars retrograde right here. And so as of Sunday, October 4th, Pluto went direct. And so I think Jupiter started on September 12th, and then Saturn went direct like last week or something like that. And then Pluto just went direct the other day. So now all three of these are direct. And if you remember back in May, when I came on in early May, all three of these planets over the next few weeks from that point were about to go retrograde. And so now here we are on the other side where they finished their retrograde and are going direct. And what we saw back in May with the retrograde of these energies, which represented essentially this strong lockdown, this strong government overreach kind of energy. And whatever the catalyst is for that, obviously it's been the coronavirus in this case. But 2020 was going to feature this kind of restriction energy and total control and potential for transformation of those controls, that kind of energy, regardless of what it was going to be. And so when they started going retrograde in May, I had mentioned that we would start seeing a liftoff of that oppression and that lockdown kind of energy. And that's exactly what started happening in May, is we had some slow liftoffs in different parts of the world, in the US, where restrictions were lifted slightly. Okay, but then I was suspicious about June. So here's Mars. If you go back 4 months back to June, I think it was just a few days after that, around the 12th or 13th, when Mars was conjunct Neptune. And I came on that day and basically said, this is where I feel like we could see some kind of a deceptive push toward a secondary lockdown. And you can see right here, all three of these planets were retrograde at that time, up here. And this is exactly what started happening then. And at that moment in time, the protests / riots were the #1 news, and the coronavirus had become secondary news. But on this date is when it started turning around again, and suddenly we started seeing more lockdowns. And these lockdowns were deceptive, in my opinion, because they weren't based on deaths increasing, they were based on cases increasing. And so, and that had a lot to do with increased testing, and not a lot to do with increased severity or danger to anyone. And that kind of went under the rug, and no one really said much. And those secondary lockdowns have started lifting a little bit across um, across the world in the country here, from June through the early part of the fall. But as we come back to now, and now we can jump away from the astrology for a second, but this time of year in October, if you look at any graph for virus season peaks in the winter. Okay, most of the world is in the northern hemisphere, so most of the world experiences their winter, the beginning of their winter or virus season here in the fall of what we call October and November. Here is our fall. And so we're going to start seeing an uptick in both cases and deaths related to the flu, generic coronaviruses, probably COVID-19 as well. I mean, they're all going to go up because that's what happens naturally in the cycle. And you can already see, like New York City, I just saw just a couple days ago, they are starting to re-lock down. Okay, and there's other parts of the world too that are starting to increase the restrictions and the lockdowns, and what's been common here in recent weeks has been like these what we could call soft curfews in some places and hard curfews in others. And the hard curfews are obvious. You got to be in by this time of night. The soft curfews are, well, grocery stores don't open past 10 p.m. anymore, do they? Right? Depending on where you are, that might not be true exactly where you are, but in a lot of places, it's just like this kind of general rule where stores are closing at a certain time. So if nothing's open past a certain time, then it's kind of like a curfew. It's just not a hard curfew. It's just there's nothing else to do out there, so you might as well go home kind of curfew. And so we're starting to see that. And so the question is, will the lockdowns get especially with the redirect motion now of these three planets in Capricorn, is the lockdown going to kind of reach its peak and, be at its strongest point here over the next several weeks, especially I should say with the election coming up, and there can be some political motivations for preventing in-person voting and things like that in the U.S. here in 4 weeks, and we can, like I said, we can expect it that cases and deaths from viruses in general are going to rise in the next few weeks or over the next few weeks. It's inevitable. It would be a miracle if it didn't happen. It would be the first time ever, right? And so it's going to happen. But are we going to respond, or are we going to allow, I guess, those in charge, the ruling elites, to lock us down hard, harder than they did even in the spring, when we were coming out of virus season, right? And that's part of the reason why COVID-19 peaked in April, essentially, and really has crashed ever since in terms of deaths, because it didn't have much legs to stand on as far as the timing that it came into the northern hemisphere, and so it didn't probably do what it could have done had it come, say, in November of 2019, rather than in March of 2020. Probably would have been a larger curve and a longer curve than it was. The question remains: is it going to come back, extra normal, or are they going to, be able to utilize what are essentially normal numbers for virus increases this time of year and make it appear that, oh no, it's coming back again, we've got to lock down hard? So I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but that is the kind of energy that can be associated with, all these big players that we saw how they played out this whole year. So now they're all in direct motion in Capricorn. It's kind of like that energy it gets kind of a momentum boost essentially to lock down. But that is not going to be long lived. I mean, Pluto will remain in Capricorn for several more years, but Jupiter and Saturn, as we've talked about in the last couple of videos, they've got a short life left in Capricorn, and that life ends just around the solstice, so about 2.5 months from now. In December, we can shoot up to there, jump up to December 21st, 2020. Right around that time, that's when the sun enters Capricorn as the solstice. And it's also when Jupiter and Saturn are going to cross the threshold from Capricorn to Aquarius. So I think if there is an extra strong lockdown here over the next few weeks, it's going to be short-lived, and there's probably going to be reasons for that, okay? And so now that we've kind of backtracked and kind of caught ourselves up to where we've been, we could talk about where we're at now and what's coming up. So Mars, as I mentioned earlier, is retrograde. We talked about that in my last video, which was in early August. I was talking about how Mars was going to make a square to this cluster of planets. It's going to begin the square in August, and that square it's going to end in this December timeframe. Okay, and so that coincides with when Jupiter and Saturn crosses into Aquarius. And right now, so before in August, Mars was direct, and these planets were all retrograde when it made the square. Now it's going to make this square to all these planets essentially while it's retrograde and they're direct. Okay, and then it's going to finish the job here in the later part of 2020, early 2021, when it finally squares them for the final time. And so what I see happening here is, especially when we get to next week, and this is interesting because I just saw literally about an hour ago that President Trump is planning on debating Joe Biden on the 15th. So we just did a debate about a week ago on the 29th of September. And now he's saying next week on the 15th. And what do we see on the 15th? We see right around that time, the sun opposing that Mars and forming squares to that cluster. So this is really going to heat up this energy. And you can bet that if that debate does happen, it's going to be a lot about the coronavirus and to lock down or to not lock down, right? And here we are with what I think was a publicity stunt. You have President Trump getting COVID, or not, I should say, testing positive for coronavirus, which is not getting COVID. There's no determination there, the way the PCR test works, and recovering essentially very quickly and very easily, and to the point where he can basically say, "I'm ready to debate next week." And I'm not saying that he faked the illness as a publicity stunt, but again, we're entering virus season. He's a 74-year-old man, probably run down a little bit, flying around the country doing different things. His whole staff is run down, and some coronavirus, which are generally not deadly, like common cold or the coronavirus, is spreading around because a lot of the Trump's team there are coming up with positive PCR tests. And again, if you're not familiar, the PCR test is not a determination of COVID-19. It just generically picks up on viral load. It amplifies RNA material, which is going to happen in response. It's your immune system response, and then it's counting the viral load essentially. And it can be any one of the family members of coronaviruses. It's not necessarily COVID-19. The antibody tests, in retrospect, could tell us whether or not a person was exposed to COVID-19 once the antibodies develop, but you have to have it first for the antibodies to develop. And so all we know is that there's some virus going around. I would not go out so far on a limb to say that they're all testing positive and it's all fake or something. I think they're all genuinely testing positive for a virus. Whether or not it's COVID-19 is not something we can know. But either way, it doesn't seem very severe, seeing that President Trump seems to be the only one that's sick or got sick. Everyone else doesn't seem to be very symptomatic. And he is 74, so it makes sense that he would be more susceptible to getting sick. And the treatment, which is therapeutic and not, vaccine related, seems to be working just fine. And so the publicity stunt part of this is, he gets tested on a regular basis, and he had to know that in the fall, when virus season increases, that eventually he was going to test positive for a coronavirus. If we all were getting tested on a regular basis every year, we would have coronaviruses very often. That's just the way it is. And so it happened. And so when it happened, I think they jumped on this opportunity to show that therapeutics work. That's my opinion. And that's kind of what the push, I think, is going to be next week if this debate goes on. And that's going to be, again, that lockdown energy that really wants to come in and say, oh, danger, danger. We can't have in-person elections, this and that, versus, well, it's totally safe. We can go do this. You can see it obviously isn't that dangerous. I think Trump even said something the other day or yesterday, not to let it run your life or control your life or something. Like don't take it too harshly, the coronavirus. live on, live on with your life. So you can imagine that's going to be a big theme next week as we go in there. And obviously this is fuel for the fire. The fact that, Trump tested positive, he had symptoms, he took some treatments, and now he's better. That doesn't seem very scary. It doesn't seem very, um, like a very good excuse to lock down the country and kill the economy and make people wear masks that are healthy and uninfected. And it's hard to make the argument for that once you have this in place. Back in March, when we were first just hearing about this crazy, scary, novel coronavirus, people just kind of fell into this idea of wearing masks and social distancing because it seemed like that made the most sense based on the information we had. But we have more information now, so it's going to be a bit more of a battle, and that's, again, this battle between the old guard and the new reality is what is really represented by Mars squaring that cluster, like I've said in the last couple of videos. And the sun is only going to ignite that next week if there's a debate. So whether there's debate or not, it's going to be ignited. Again, whether it's the media talking about needing lockdowns or whatever it is, I think this topic is going to be pretty strong come next week. And that makes sense too, because now we're getting to mid-October next week, and we're getting even deeper into the virus season, and so we can expect cases and even deaths to go up as we move through that period. Anyway, so that's what I see there, and we've mentioned that on the election, I should say. So let's go back 2 days. So if we go back to October 13th, that afternoon, this is going to be next week, so a week from today. This is when Mercury goes retrograde late in the day, West Coast time here on October 13th. And it's not going to go direct until we get to election day. That's going to be when it goes direct. So we can go a couple hours. It's going to be later in the day, I think. So I'm going further into the day, and there it is. So by the time we get to about, say, the evening time in the US, so between like 5 and 8 p.m., depending on where you are, this is when we have Mercury going direct. Now, at the same time, Mars, which again we know is retrograde, is going to be going back to its furthest degree that it will fall back to, about 15 degrees Aries. That's where it's going to sit for about 10 days before it goes direct around the 13th. So I think a couple hours into that day, it's going to turn black there. Come on, Mars, turn black. There it is. So by late in the day, 10 days after the election, this is when Mars goes direct. But the point being is that both Mercury and Mars will be at the end of their retrograde phases as far as what degree they're going back to on election day. So they'll both be in kind of a stalled position. And I've been saying this since the beginning of the year, that the election does not look like a smooth one. And now we have plenty of logical reasoning behind why it is unlikely to be a smooth one. Okay, with the mail-in balloting and with the talk about, back and forth about how we can, verify the election, and the left is saying don't listen to Trump because if he's declaring that he won, it's fake news, or and all this. And we know this is going to happen. We know that what's going to happen is because the majority of mail-in ballots are going to be from people on the left, because it's been very politicized, the whole coronavirus and the danger of it and everything else. So Trump is likely on election night to have a very strong lead, probably both in the popular vote and the electoral college. And of course, they're not going to be able to call it yet because not all the votes are in. And so it's going to take a little while. So I think we're looking at, at least until mid-November, right around when Mars finally goes direct. So at least a week, week and a half, I would say, before we get any real sense of results. But certainly by the time we get a month after that, by mid-December, when we start seeing, Mars starting to finish up its square to Pluto, and then Jupiter and Saturn, and again, crossing that threshold around the solstice. So right around the solstice, it's interesting because you got Mars exactly squaring Pluto. So finishing that up, the Mars will move on. That square will be done. That started back in August. It'll be done finally. And we got the move of Jupiter, Saturn. So for sure, we'll have an answer prior to that point. In between Thanksgiving and this solstice here, we have two eclipses. And so eclipses have a way of really, taking us from from one set of train tracks. I like to think of it, and then the train track switches on you, and now you're set off in a different direction. And so we're unlikely to be stalled in any way after those eclipses, which the second one I believe is December 14th. Yeah, there'll be an eclipse right in Sagittarius, and so we'll have some definitive answers. I think it'll be more like mid-November, mid to late November. That's logical, and it's consistent with the astrology, whereby we have, Mercury turning direct on the day, Mars stationary direct on the day of the election, but it taking a week and a half for Mars to actually start moving forward. And that's Mars in Aries, that's action, right? So um, that really gives us a sense that it's the action of moving forward with what we now know. And so we'll have an answer to who won. And I think there is going to be some contention, of course, and this is kind of a desperate election for the globalist special interests, which I like to call the old guard. They're part of this battle, and then there's that new reality on the other side. And that new reality isn't necessarily, this is not necessarily good versus evil. It's just a battle between an old style of how we want to govern the world and a style of governance based on some new information, some hidden information, and things we didn't know. Okay, so that kind of segues me into just looking at this Mercury retrograde that again starts next week, where it goes retrograde at 11 degrees Scorpio. And Mercury retrograde in Scorpio is all about digging up the goods, digging it up, okay? The secrets, the hidden information. And one of the major aspects that Mercury, while it's retrograde in Scorpio, is going to make is if actually go back to right now, today, Mercury is actually within 1 degree of an exact opposition to Uranus in Taurus. And so this is the first of 3 oppositions that will happen during Mercury's retrograde. So it's going to make one right now. It'll make one like next, a little bit, like maybe a couple weeks from now. And then it's going to make a final one when we get to, lo and behold, just, a couple weeks after the election. So that's when it's going to be opposite for the final time. So this is why I think that, when Mars goes direct on the 13th, Mercury opposes Uranus on the 17th. This is our time frame, I think, for when we'll get our answers for the election. And it's going to be a big surprise to the majority of people, I think. And that's, the mainstream media defines the majority opinion, right? It defines that. And so whatever happens is going to be a surprise to the mainstream media majority opinion, okay? And so my interpretation of that is, not only do I think Trump's going to win, but I think there's been a lot alluding to illicit activities that will be potentially at least indictments for, or the initiations of prosecution toward, and that's coming from the other side, okay? And what we saw, and so what I'm saying is that I think there's going to be some surprise information that kind of rocks the boat, rocks the foundation, that Uranus and Taurus, that our comfort zone. So what we assume is true and right with the world, there's going to be some surprise information that kind of upsets that a little bit. And that can be very liberating and freeing, but it can jolt at the same time. So depending on what a person assumes is true, this can be very illuminating, for, to put it lightly. And so the next several weeks, so this starts again today, right on through mid-November, I think a lot of things are going to come to light. A lot of things are going to come to light. And there's going to be, some unexpected things for certain individuals that hold strong to, again, the old guard kind of energy, their old guard assumptions about the best interests for Americans and the world, okay? And so this American election, I think, is extremely important for the entire world, and the entire world is looking at this. And the globalist special interests obviously want Trump out of there. They have no interest in someone not funding the WHO and pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and all those globalist interests that have a lot more to do with global social control than they do with anything to do with world health or the health of the planet, which is what they present themselves as. And that doesn't make Trump a hero, but it does make him in the way of that. And I'm actually going to, if you've seen some of my previous longer videos, presentations with slides and whatnot, I think in a few weeks, end of October, I'm going to probably do one. It's going to be a follow-up to a talk I did in 2017, which was about what I call the power generations. And in that, I talk about Trump and his chart and how it relates to Regulus switching from Leo to Virgo, and how Trump represents something energetically with that. And so I don't want to get too deep into it, but if you are interested in that, I'm going to talk about that and his role in that transition. And again, it doesn't make him a hero; it makes him symbolically important in my opinion, that is in blocking the global special interests that aren't really interested in our best interests. But that, again, I'll get deeper into that talk. But I think some of that stuff will be coming out. Some of the true intentions of the global special interest may be part of this this period over the next several weeks into mid-November, where things really come to light. If you were paying attention just last week, so if we go back, I think it was the 29th of, yeah, it was the morning of the debates between Trump and Biden on Tuesday, September 29th, which was just a week ago. What came out with when Mercury is at 2 degrees Scorpio, and why that's important, because there's this document that came out that was essentially, suggested that it's known within the FBI and intelligence agencies that Hillary Clinton, for example, was behind the plot, essentially to frame Donald Trump as colluding with Russia, and that the Obama administration, including Obama himself, knew it. They were briefed on it, and that it was allowed to happen. Okay, that's basically what this is saying. And if you're listening to my videos a couple videos ago, on September 9th, when Mars went retrograde, that was the date that Hillary was supposed to testify about her emails. This is about Benghazi, so a different topic. But the idea is she got out of that. There was something, her lawyer got her out of that, having to testify or whatnot. But it's just interesting that when it comes to karma and things like that, you can't get out of everything. And what happened here is Hillary's sun in her natal chart is at 2 degrees Scorpio. And we have Mercury right there at 2 degrees Scorpio on the day when this came out. And so because Mercury is going retrograde, it's going to make 2 more passes to Hillary's sun at 2 degrees Scorpio. And that's going to be on October 25th. So if you go to October 25th, roughly there it is. And it's going to be with the sun there too, right around her birthday. I think her birthday is either the 24th or the 25th or something like that. And so there's going to be that. And then the final pass, again, the day before Mars goes direct, right? And just 5 days before Mercury makes its final opposition to Uranus. There it is back again. So that mid-November time period is really the culmination of what just started here last week. So, and that may be the beginning of many dominoes that relate to, again, the hidden information, not just her, but people that have, because it's pretty obvious that since Donald Trump, became president, it's been one thing after another to try to get him out. And that has less to do with his character and more to do with his interference with the globalist special interests. And I can't reiterate that enough. And obviously the mainstream media's job is to make everyone hate Trump for that. It's easy to make him look bad because he hasn't exactly been the best character in his life. But the only reason that the mainstream media, owned by the special interest, wants to oust him and make it appear that he needs to be ousted, and there's many reasons to do it, is because he stands in the way and he's ruining the plans, essentially ruining them. And they think, another 4 years of that could ruin them. And honestly, that's I don't see that as a bad thing. And again, he's playing a certain role. And if you want to learn more about that role, you can tune in to what I'll be doing in a few weeks here. Or you can, look back at a previous video about the power generations, and also look at the video I did in December talking about the 2020s, a decade coming up, because I'm going to kind of combine that with the power generations and kind of do a new update relative to where we are now to better understand what's coming up in the next several years. You know, whether it's Trump or it's not Trump in the next 4 years. Either way, it doesn't even matter really, but just the energetics of that. But the point being that the reason why Trump gets picked on by the media is because they're owned by the special interests, and those special interests see him as the biggest threat to those plans that they have. That's it. That's kind of the end of that story. And I think that we're going to see, specifically with Hillary Clinton, but also with others, some information that might be very surprising. Things that are supposed to be just conspiracy theories, you know, coming out with documented indictments and documented, you know, real lawfully based, um, you know, suggestions and things. So not just hearsay and talk, but just, you know, actual, you know, where the rubber meets the road kinds of things. And that, again, that is where that Uranus and Taurus disruption is that foundation of comfort getting totally disrupted for some people if they're attached to that, right? But that's here we are today. Again, this is just the start of it. Mercury opposite Uranus. And so the next several weeks to about mid-November, that's going to be a major theme. So look for what comes from that. Okay, so moving on to the eclipses. So now we're past, we go back into November, we're past where the final opposition of Mercury and Uranus happened. And we go a couple weeks later, and now we're going to have, if they don't click, there it is. We're going to have an eclipse. I believe it's around the 30th. Yeah, it's going to be a few hours before that. There we go. So it's going to be in Gemini around like 8 or 9 degrees. There we are. There's the moon, there's the sun. So this is our full moon, and it's going to be an eclipse. It's right on the nodes. And so that's the first eclipse. And then the second one will be 2 weeks later on the 14th. And so the theme, the general theme though, with this Gemini lunar eclipse followed by this Sagittarius, and if we go back, we'll make it exact, the Sagittarius solar eclipse, which will also be trining Mars now direct in Aries, while also squaring Neptune in Pisces. The major theme, if I just could put them together, is kind of an awareness of deception. Let's put it that way, because we have Neptune in Pisces, and when it's squaring Sagittarius, a lot of times it's when we come to awareness of deceptions, come to awareness, you know, the information we can't deny in front of our faces. That's what the Gemini eclipse on the 30th is kind of like that on the ground information. Like, how can we refute what's right in front of our eyes? And then followed up by kind of the explanation of the deception, right? And so there's a sense of being, you know, the realizations happening in that trine to Mars now direct, which is again is about to finish its battle. See, now it's going to be 20 degrees Aries, so it's going to be marching toward Pluto, then Jupiter, then Saturn as far as the squares go over the next month. From that point, it's like the battle is over, right? And this again is only a week before the solstice when Jupiter and Saturn cross the threshold. So the battle is over at that point, and we understand a little bit about how we were lied to on either side. Okay, so and what, you know, what's true from what's fiction, that, you know, becomes the theme of that time. And then moving on from that, moving on. So if we go a week later, moving on into the future, Aquarius represents that future, and here we are, Saturn, Jupiter, laying that new foundation for the future based on the new reality. And that new reality is based on the new information that we're getting. So everything that's uncovered these next several weeks to a couple of months, and then kind of the explanation and organization of what that means and how we've been deceived and who deceived and what. And so a lot of coming to terms, I think, would be a good phrase to use, coming to terms here in the holiday season. And then, you know, we set off the solstice with that conjunction and move on from there. And so that would take us into 2021. And I'll probably do a video talking about 2021 specifically, so I don't want to get too much into it. But just as a general preview, the biggest themes, in my opinion, of that are, again, going back to Uranus and Taurus, it's going to get highlighted by both Jupiter with a square to Uranus in January. So we go up a month, and there's Jupiter squaring Uranus right there. So mid to late January. And then behind that, we have Saturn, which is going to start its square with Uranus. There it is at 7 degrees, 7 degrees in February, but it's not going to end until the end of 2021, almost right up until New Year's 2022. And so this general theme of Uranus getting aspected with a square by first Jupiter for a few weeks in January, and then Saturn for the rest of the year from February to December. That's our major theme, and they're related to the the threshold essentially of that conjunction, that new future, okay, based on the new reality. That's what this is going to have to do with. And just as a quick preview, like I said, I don't want to get deep into it, but when it comes to technologies that may have been hidden from us, both medically and energy related, that has a lot to do with going back to the coming to terms with how we've been deceived, and the players behind that, and the secrets behind that. And I see this as much more likely under a Trump victory than I do under a Biden victory, only because Biden is just a puppet for that global special interest. It's the old guard that's in there. And again, Trump plays a role. He'll be out of there the latest 2024. So even if you don't like him, he's not going to be there forever. But he can serve this transition and allowing that to come through, in my opinion. But that could be a theme: is the rollout, that gradual rollout, or sort of that pulse with Jupiter squaring Uranus in January, but then the rest of 2021 being that gradual shift and rollout, and that in the adjustments that we have to take as a society. Once we realize, wow, not only can we use this and does that change things, but we could have been using this for how long, And so it's a real adjustment period. It's not exactly smooth. It's sort of trying to figure out, now that we know this, now that we're in this new reality of what's real and what isn't, how do we implement it? And so it can be a challenging several years following this for the implementation aspect of any new technologies well, not even new technologies, but technologies that have been hidden, for example. And I wouldn't be surprised if this has to do with extraterrestrial technology. There's a lot of people that believe that the accelerations of technology in the mid 20th century had to do with alien interference and intervention and whatnot. And it's not too far-fetched when you realize how advanced technology became, especially from before World War II to after World War II. And who knows what was actually happening then. And when John F. Kennedy came into office right after Eisenhower, and Eisenhower on his exit speech in 1961 was talking about the military industrial complex and warning of what its powers could become, and also warning about the scientific elite, which is what we're seeing here in the modern time when you have like Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci, and the idea that people are censored in social media, even if they're licensed doctors, for merely suggesting things like vitamins or drugs that have worked well for them in treating the coronavirus. They're getting censored. Why? Because it's the technocrats, it's the scientific elite that tell us what is and what isn't and what we should do. And that's something, again, that Eisenhower warned against. And then you had John F. Kennedy right behind him talking about secret societies and threatening to expose them and dismantle them. And then we all know what happened to John F. Kennedy, right? And I think we're in a time where we have a certain administration in place right now that is rogue relative to the global special interests, and as rogue to the idea of keeping secrets and whatnot. And whether you like it or not, it may be just the thing that's needed to break the system that has been kind of keeping us in the dark for a long time. Okay. And that's my take on it. That's my look at it. Anyway, so like I said, I'll be coming back in a few weeks, probably on October 27th is what I'm thinking, that night, that evening, probably around like 6 p.m. Pacific to Tuesday night. It's 3 weeks from tonight. That's probably going to be the day I do it. It might be a different day, but I will send something out when I have it official. But in that case, I'll have some slides, and I'll be talking specifically about the next several years coming up, how it relates to certain individuals in the generation, especially those right now, I think, born in the 90s, born in the 1990s, are now in their 20s, approaching their Saturn return. So anyone born in the early 90s is approaching their Saturn return here real soon. And you're born in the late 90s, you have, to the end of this decade. And what this is going to mean, relative to how we're seeing young people now, and what beliefs they have and are being fed versus what is likely to happen over the next decade on that level. And then, also I want to talk about, at least on the front end of the 2020s in the next, several years, is the role that Trump plays energetically in this transition from the fixed star Regulus transiting from Leo into Virgo, and how that relates to his chart, and how what's happening right now is actually really, when we see what's happening with like Hollywood and sports, it's something that I talked about 3 years ago, that I didn't understand how we would see them starting to fall apart. Didn't understand how, but I knew that it was going to be the energy of Regulus and Virgo was not going to be able to withstand what Regulus and Leo could, which was elevating celebrities, elevating sports people, and whatnot. And we're seeing this, this destruction, this respect for Hollywood diminishing, this viewership for sports diminishing, and very rapidly. And of course, the virus has something to do with that. But who saw that coming as a reason? But anyway, we'll get into that in that talk. So I want to end it here. So we talked about, just to recap, we talked about how the cluster of planets here, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, are all now direct, and how that's going back to May when they were all going retrograde. So now it's kind of rectifying that, they're going direct again, and how Mars is playing a role with that battle, forming that square still until about December. This is going to lead us to, toward the election time, when Mercury is going to be turning direct on election day. Mars is going to be stationary direct on election day, finally going direct a week later, right at the time that Mercury finishes its opposition to Uranus, which is starting right now. The secrecy, the things that may come out, etc., especially Hillary Clinton related, or she's just the beginning. I think there's others that will be indicted or potentially indicted, and then how that takes us into the eclipses, late November into December, and then on the back end of that, when we get to, again, after the solstice, or right around the solstice, when Jupiter and Saturn join each other, cross the threshold in Aquarius, and that happens just as Mars is finishing its square at Pluto. And so 2021, that's when we'll get into Jupiter square Uranus, followed by a long square from Saturn to Uranus. And so that fills out the themes coming up here. But I'll come back later this month for that, other talk, but then probably just before the new year, talking about 2021. So we'll get deeper into the Jupiter, Saturn to Uranus aspects. So anyway, Christopher Taylor, Sovereign Harmony. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on YouTube, or you can find me if you like daily posts or semi-daily posts, not every day, but I post often on Facebook, Sovereign Harmony. Just look for that on Facebook, and then you can start following those posts. So thanks for listening, watching, and we will talk again soon. Bye-bye.